My husband left me for my sister. 18 years later, their daughter knocked on my door. He laughed with my sister that morning, the kind of laugh that used to belong to me. The sunlight was too warm, the coffee too bitter, and every smile at that table felt rehearsed. They thought I didn't see it. The glances, the pauses, the tiny sparks between them. But I did, and I learned that sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive in storms. It pours itself quietly into your morning coffee. Have you ever felt betrayal sitting right across the table, pretending to be family? Morning sunlight spilled through the tall kitchen windows of their Connecticut home, spreading soft gold over polished wood and porcelain. The house looked peaceful, the kind of peace that exists right before something breaks. Eleanor moved carefully, her silk robe tied neatly around her waist, her movements deliberate, quiet choreography honed by years of being the anchor of the household. She poured fresh coffee into 3 cups, the dark liquid swirling like thought itself. Across the table sat her husband, Mark, crisp shirt, Annandone tie, a half smile. Beside him, her younger sister, Lila, in a pale lilac sweater that matched her name and her laughter. She had come just for a few weeks after a breakup. Or so she'd said when she arrived with too many suitcases and eyes too eager to please. Now, those few weeks had stretched into 2 months. Eleanor tried to focus on the soft clink of spoons, the butter melting on toast, the hum of the radio in the background, all the little noises that kept a family sounding normal. But her mind noticed the quiet things instead. How Mark's hand lingered near Lila's when he passed the jam. How Lila's gaze lingered longer than it should have. How the silence between their laughter was somehow louder than both. She stirred her coffee slowly. Once, twice, 3 times. Her reflection rippled on the surface. Calm above, trembling underneath. "Do you want more toast?" she asked, her voice level, almost kind. Mark smiled. "Sure. Thanks, Ellie." He didn't look up. Lila did. Their eyes met for half a second. Just long enough for Eleanor to read something unspoken there. Admiration? Fear? Guilt? She couldn't tell. When she placed the toast on his plate, their fingertips brushed. He didn't notice. She did. The conversation was light, almost too light. Lila talking about her latest freelance project. Mark teasing her about city boys who don't know how to hold real jobs. The kind of talk that sounds harmless until you realize you're the only one not laughing. Eleanor watched, quiet, polite. She had learned long ago that women like her, steady, composed, weren't supposed to make scenes. She was the kind of wife who kept things smooth, even when everything inside her wanted to ask why. Her gaze drifted toward the family photo on the counter, the one taken years ago on a beach in Maine. Lila stood between them, arms wrapped around both. Eleanor remembered the day vividly, Lila's laughter, Mark's hand around her shoulder, and the moment she felt even then, slightly outside her own picture. "Any plans today, Lila?" she asked softly. Lila looked up. "Maybe a walk downtown. Mark offered to show me the little antique shop by the pier." A tiny pause. Eleanor smiled. "That sounds nice." It wasn't anger that settled in her chest. Not yet. It was the cold realization that she was slowly disappearing from her own life, one polite morning at a time. Mark stood and reached for his jacket. "Big meeting today. Might be late tonight." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her mug. "Should I wait for dinner?" He hesitated, a flicker, quick as a blink. "No, don't. I'll probably eat out." Lila's eyes dropped to her plate. Something inside Eleanor stilled completely. She didn't ask with whom. She didn't need to. As the door closed behind him, silence flooded the kitchen. Lila busied herself rinsing dishes that didn't need washing. Eleanor sat down, cupping the mug in her hands. It was warm, deceptively so, like a lie told kindly. She brought it to her lips and took a slow sip. The coffee burned slightly on her tongue, bitter and unbalanced. She didn't flinch. Outside, the lilac bushes she'd planted 10 years ago swayed in the morning breeze, blooming faithfully, no matter who watered them. Eleanor's reflection in the glass looked calm, unbothered. But in her eyes, something had begun, small, sharp, alive. The first fracture in the illusion. She set the cup down gently and whispered to herself, almost smiling. Sometimes it starts this quietly. And from that silence, the storm began to gather. The rain had been falling since the afternoon, soft at first, then steadier until it became the kind of downpour that blurred the world outside into watercolor. It traced the glass like slow tears, running in crooked lines down the living room window. Eleanor stood by it for a long while, holding her cup of tea, though it had gone cold hours ago. The house felt strangely alive tonight. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the heater, the faint whisper of thunder. The kind of night when silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. Behind her, Mark paced. The sound of his shoes against the hardwood floor matched the rhythm of the rain. Uneven, restless. Lila sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly together, her shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from decision. Eleanor didn't turn around when she spoke. "Is someone going to tell me what's going on?" Her voice was calm, too calm, like glass before it shatters. Mark stopped pacing. He sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to do this tonight." "Then why are you?" she asked quietly, still facing the window. "Because it's time," he said. His tone was heavy, not cruel, not soft, just final. "I can't keep living like this." The rain hit harder now, tapping insistently against the window. Eleanor finally turned. Her husband stood in the middle of the room, the same man who'd once kissed her forehead every morning before work, who'd promised forever without blinking. Now his eyes avoided hers. She noticed the small suitcase by the door. Lila's red one. Her gaze drifted to her sister. Lila looked up, tears brimming. "Ellie," she whispered, voice cracking, "please, don't hate me." For a moment, time didn't move, it just stopped. Eleanor's hand tightened around her teacup, the porcelain straining under her grip. "Don't hate you?" she repeated softly, almost in disbelief. Mark stepped closer. "I didn't plan this. It just happened. You've been so busy, distant. And Lila was here," Eleanor finished for him, her tone flat. She was here. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. Each second felt like a judgment. She didn't cry, not yet. She looked between them, her husband and her sister, both avoiding her eyes like children caught stealing something sacred. "This house," she said quietly, glancing around. "I built it brick by brick. Every bill, every paint color, every chair. I made it a home." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "And now you'll pack your bags under the same roof you're breaking." Lila covered her face with her hands. Mark stood frozen, guilt etched across his face. "I thought you deserved honesty," he said at last. Eleanor laughed, a sound too soft to be joy, too raw to be mockery. "Honesty?" she echoed. "After all this time, that's what you call it?" She walked toward the window again, her reflection faint in the glass, eyes hollow, posture straight. She didn't recognize that woman anymore. She looked like someone halfway erased, a ghost left behind by her own story. Outside, lightning flashed. For an instant, the room glowed white, showing everything too clearly, the suitcases, the guilt, the end. "Do you love her?" Eleanor asked, voice low. Mark's throat worked, but no sound came. Then quietly, "Yes." Something inside her, small and fragile, went utterly still. The kind of stillness that comes after breaking. She nodded once. "Then go." "Ellie, please," Lila started, standing. Eleanor held up a hand. "No, don't make it worse with apologies. Just go while I still remember loving you both." The words didn't come from anger. They came from the deepest kind of exhaustion, the kind that follows disbelief. Mark hesitated, as if waiting for her to change her mind. But she didn't. She couldn't. He picked up the suitcase. The zipper sounded louder than thunder. When the door opened, a gust of cold rain swept through the room, scattering papers and scenting the air with earth and endings. They stepped out together, silhouettes fading into the storm. Eleanor didn't follow. She watched through the glass. Two figures under one umbrella. disappearing into the blur of night. The reflection staring back at her looked older, heavier, but also strangely composed. She pressed her fingertips against the cold pane. The rain outside slid down like mirrored tears, tracing paths her face refused to follow. And in that moment, she understood something cruelly beautiful, that sometimes love doesn't end with shouting. It ends with silence and the sound of a closing door. The storm raged on, but inside, everything was still. Eleanor turned off the lights, one by one, until only the window glowed faintly with the city's reflection. She whispered to the empty room, voice barely there, "Let it rain. Maybe it'll wash the rest of me away." And as thunder rolled above, her heart finally broke, not with noise, but with grace. Scene: an empty house. Afternoon light drifts through half-drawn curtains. Boxes line the hallway like unspoken words. Silence. That was the first thing Eleanor had to learn to live with. It wasn't the soft kind that soothes. It was the kind that buzzes, the kind that hums behind your ribs until you start mistaking it for your own heartbeat. Days bled into each other. The house felt cavernous, every corner echoing the ghost of laughter. His, hers, theirs. The couch still held the shape of their betrayal, and the kitchen smelled faintly of the breakfast she once made for 3. She tried to fill the silence with noise. The clink of dishes, the hum of the fridge, the sound of her own breath reminded her she was still here, even if she wished she wasn't, some nights. Letters came, bills arrived, life continued with cruel punctuality. But calls from friends slowed, then stopped. Everyone loved a woman in love. No one knew what to do with one who had been left. When she finally visited her parents, her mother pressed her hand softly and whispered, "You have to let it go, dear. It's not worth holding on to pain." But how do you let go of something that still lives inside you? How do you forget the sound of your sister's voice calling the man who once called you home? So she didn't fight for what had left her. No tears in court. No letters. No pleading. When the divorce papers arrived, she signed them with a steady hand, the ink not smudging once. In the weeks that followed, she sold the house. Packed up her memories into neat brown boxes, labeled miscellaneous, as if pain could be categorized. And then she vanished into the city. A name on a lease, a woman among crowds, another quiet soul who smiled when she had to and worked when she didn't want to think. Her job as a financial analyst became her sanctuary. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't flirt, didn't leave, didn't whisper promises in the dark. They stayed where she put them. Every spreadsheet, every balance sheet, every column of data, order, precision, control. Each stacked folder on her desk became a piece of armor, shielding her from the chaos that once wore her sister's perfume. Sometimes, late at night, she'd stare at the skyline from her small apartment window, the rain tracing lines down the glass, just like before. And she'd wonder if healing really meant forgetting, or if it simply meant learning how to live with memory. Scene: Manhattan office. Evening light paints the skyline in gold and steel. Glass walls reflect the woman she has become, distant, calm, and untouchable. 18 years. That's how long it took for silence to turn into peace, or something that looked enough like it. Eleanor sat behind her glass desk, the skyline shimmering behind her like a crown she never asked for. The office was minimalist, pale marble floors, a single orchid on the shelf, and city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Every inch of it was built with precision, with patience, with pain. Her reflection stared back at her in the window, poised hair, tailored suit, eyes that had long forgotten how to beg. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who once trembled over a coffee cup. This one spoke in numbers and contracts. Her voice carried the kind of calm that made people listen. Not because it was loud, but because it never had to be. The company bore her name now. Her signature turned markets. Her judgment decided futures. Every board meeting, every headline, every congratulatory handshake carried a whisper of irony. Because somewhere out there, Mark must have seen it. Somewhere, He must have realized that the woman he left for something more exciting had built a world he could never enter. She never said it aloud, but every success of hers was an unspoken answer to his betrayal. And yet she didn't chase revenge. She didn't even want it anymore. What she wanted, and finally had, was peace. The glass walls of her office glowed as the sun dipped behind the buildings. The transparency felt deliberate. No secrets here, no shadows. Yet the same walls also kept people at a distance. Clients admired her, employees respected her, but no one knew her. And she liked it that way. Some evenings, she'd remove her heels, stand barefoot on the cool floor, and look out over Manhattan. The same city that had swallowed her pain and reshaped it into purpose. She thought about Lila sometimes, though not with anger anymore. Just curiosity. Did she ever think of her? Did she still twist her hair when nervous? Still hum old songs in the kitchen? Eleanor would never know. The bridge between them had burned quietly, leaving only ashes that the years had blown away. Her apartment uptown mirrored her office. Quiet, precise, intentional. Books stacked by color, a piano she never played, a life lived neatly between work and solitude. Some might call it lonely. Eleanor called it earned. Outside, the city pulsed, millions of stories unfolding at once. Inside, she lifted a glass of wine to her lips, savoring the silence that once terrified her, because she'd learned something about time. It doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it just teaches you how to live with the scar. It was soft at first, so soft she thought she imagined it. Eleanor looked up from her book, the fire whispering in the hearth, and waited. Another knock. Not impatient, not loud, just trembling. She set her glass of wine down and crossed the polished floor, her reflection trailing faintly in the glass walls that had kept her world so still, so controlled. When she opened the door, the city's damp breath rushed in, and with it, a girl, 17 maybe. Rain-soaked hair clinging to her cheeks, a backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide and glistening like broken glass. "Are you Eleanor?" the girl asked. Her voice cracked halfway through the name, as if saying it carried weight. Eleanor hesitated. "Yes," the girl swallowed hard. "I'm Ava." A pause. A name hanging between them like thunder about to break. Then, barely a whisper, "Lila's daughter." The world seemed to tilt, just slightly, but enough to make Eleanor reach for the doorframe. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, tapping against marble, glass, memory. She could have closed the door. Should have, maybe. But something in the girl's eyes, something fragile, lost, familiar, kept her there. It was the same look she had once seen in her own mirror, 18 years ago. "Come in," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she moved aside. Ava stepped into the light. Her clothes dripped on the floor. Her shoes left little crescent moons of water on the white marble. Eleanor noticed the small things, the frayed strap of her bag, the way her hands gripped it tightly, as if afraid it might be taken away. The penthouse, usually so composed, suddenly felt too bright, too cold. The girl's presence, raw and real, made the perfection around them look artificial. "Sit," Eleanor offered, gesturing to the couch. Ava obeyed, her shoulders curling inward, as though she were trying to make herself smaller. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "Mom, she's sick." And her voice broke, and the sentence dissolved into the sound of rain. Eleanor froze. The word mom clawed through 18 years of practiced indifference. Lila. The name she hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 2 decades suddenly felt alive again. Too alive. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Memories flickered. Her sister's laughter, the betrayal, the slammed door. But in front of her wasn't Lila. It was a child. A child with her eyes. Eleanor knelt slowly, reaching out a hand but stopping halfway. "You're safe here," she said quietly. "You don't have to be afraid." The girl looked up, her eyes brimming. "You look like her," Eleanor whispered before she could stop herself. Ava's lips quivered. "That's what everyone says. The rain outside grew heavier, the city disappearing behind streaks of water. And in that moment, the doorway, still open, felt like a symbol of everything Eleanor had avoided. The past, the pain, the ghosts, finally finding their way home. She stood, closed the door gently, and exhaled. A breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 18 years. Scene: Eleanor's penthouse living room. Midnight. The rain has gentled into mist. 2 cups of tea steamed between them, fragile warmth between 2 generations of unfinished stories. The rain had stopped, but its echo lingered. Soft, like the residue of something that used to hurt. Eleanor poured tea into 2 porcelain cups, the same set she had bought in London years ago, for guests who never came. Ava sat across from her, hair now dry, wearing one of Eleanor's cardigans that hung too loosely on her frame. Her fingers circled the cup, drawing comfort from its heat. The city outside was a blur of light and distance, a reflection of 2 lives finally intersecting. For a while, they said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, sacred almost. Then Ava spoke. Her voice was soft, but every word felt like a stone being placed on a grave. Mom and Dad, they split up years ago. Eleanor didn't flinch. Not outwardly, but something inside her tightened. A string pulled too long, finally snapping. Ava continued, eyes on the tea. He left her. For someone else. Younger, prettier maybe. I don't know. A small laugh escaped her, bitter and out of place. Guess it runs in the family. Eleanor's breath caught, not from anger, but from recognition. The symmetry of pain had come full circle. Ava looked up then, eyes glistening. She never recovered. She tried to, but every night when she's half asleep she says your name. She hesitated. Sometimes she cries it. Eleanor's hand froze mid-motion, her spoon clinking softly against porcelain. My name? She asked quietly. Ava nodded. She says, Ellie, I'm sorry. Over and over. Like it's the only prayer she remembers. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to breathe. In, out, as the weight of forgiveness pressed down. Eleanor leaned back, her gaze distant. Lila, her sister. The girl who once shared her secrets, her laughter, her dreams. The same girl who had torn her world apart and vanished into her own ruin. For years, Eleanor had imagined Lila living a happy life, the kind that justified the betrayal. A husband, a home, a story worth the pain she caused. But now, hearing Ava's trembling confession, the truth arrived, raw and pitiful. Life had done its work. Without Eleanor's hand, without revenge, justice had unfolded in its own quiet rhythm. Where is she now? Eleanor asked. Upstate, Ava said softly. Small apartment. She's sick and lungs may be worse. She doesn't have much time left. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling through memories that still smelled of old rain and broken trust. Does she know you're here? Ava shook her head. No, she'd hate it. But I had to come. I needed to understand. She swallowed hard. Why does she never stop loving you? Eleanor's throat tightened. She looked down at her cup, steam curling like ghosts between them. For years, she had fed her silence, convincing herself it was strength. But now, in the reflection of that tea, she saw something else. A life defined by restraint, not peace. She set her cup down gently. You said she's sick. How long? Ava hesitated. Doctors aren't sure, but she's fading. Outside, thunder murmured somewhere far away, like a heart remembering how to ache. Eleanor rose and crossed to the window. The city shimmered below, her empire of glass and logic, built from everything she refused to feel. And in that silence, the realization came. Revenge had never been necessary. The universe had already rewritten the story. Behind her, Ava whispered, I'm sorry for showing up. I just thought maybe you'd want to know. Eleanor turned, her voice soft but steady. You did the right thing, Ava. The girl looked up, uncertain. So, what happens now? Eleanor offered a faint, tired smile. Now? She glanced toward the window again, where the reflection of two women, one young, one weathered, blurred into a single outline. Now, she said, we finish what your mother started, by telling the truth. Hospitals have their own kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that hums between heartbeats. Eleanor walked down the long corridor, her heels soft against the linoleum floor. Every step echoed like memory, measured, reluctant, inevitable. A nurse led her to room 213. She's awake, the nurse said gently, but tired. Eleanor nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. The door opened with a muted click. Lila lay propped against white pillows, a thin cardigan draped over her shoulders. The years had rewritten her, softer in some places, hollow in others. Her hair, streaked with gray, framed a face that once mirrored Eleanor's. Now it looked like a reflection stretched through time and regret. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. Decades of silence, letters never written, tears never shared. Lila's eyes widened first, disbelief flickering into fragile relief. Eleanor. Her voice broke on the name, like it had been waiting all these years to be spoken aloud. Eleanor stood at the foot of the bed, clutching her handbag, an anchor for hands that didn't know where to rest. Hello, Lila, she said, her tone calm, almost formal. Lila blinked fast, tears welling. You came? Eleanor nodded once. Your daughter told me. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint beeping of the heart monitor, steady, fragile, alive. Then the words came, trembling and unpolished. I'm sorry, Lila whispered. I was young and stupid, and I thought I was saving you. You always looked so tired, so small beside him. I thought her breath faltered. If I took him away, maybe you'd finally be free. Eleanor's eyes softened. She didn't move closer, but the distance between them felt less sharp now. You thought you were saving me? She repeated quietly. Lila nodded weakly, tears slipping down her temples. I ruined everything. I ruined you. Eleanor exhaled, the sound more like surrender than forgiveness. You didn't ruin me, she said at last. You saved me. You just didn't know from what. Lila looked up, confused. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice gentle but unyielding. Mark never loved anyone, not really. Not you, not me. He only loved what he could control. You took that from him. You freed me the day you left. The monitor beeped softly, in rhythm with Lila's tears. For the first time in decades, both sisters let silence do the talking. It wasn't cold now. It was warm, heavy with the understanding that some wounds stop bleeding only when you stop touching them. Lila reached out a trembling hand. Eleanor hesitated, then took it. The skin was frail, the bones sharp beneath it, but the gesture was whole. I never stopped missing you, Lila whispered. Eleanor smiled faintly. You never had to. They sat like that, two women stitched together by pain and time, while the winter light softened across the bed. Outside the window, the snow began to fall, slow and soundless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eleanor looked toward the window, where the gray light pressed gently against the glass. It didn't judge. It didn't choose sides. It simply was, and in that moment, the past stopped mattering. The hotel was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every thought sound louder. Eleanor and Ava sat across from each other at a corner table, untouched tea cooling between them. The lights from passing cars shimmered across the window, breaking their reflections into fragments, two faces, one past, one future, caught in the same pane of glass. Down the road, the hospital lights flickered faintly. Lila was sleeping. The nurse had said it might be her last night. Neither woman spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was grieving. Ava turned her cup slowly, tracing the lip with her finger, the way her mother used to do. Did you ever hate her? Ava asked quietly. Her voice carried the weight of someone afraid of the answer. Eleanor leaned back, her gaze settling on the darkened window. Her own reflection looked older tonight, softer around the edges. She could almost see Lila's outline beside hers, as if memory still shared her seat. "Yes," Eleanor said at last. "For years." Ava looked up, eyes wide, waiting for more. Eleanor smiled faintly, not bitterly, not sadly, but like someone who finally understood the map of her own heart. "But then I realized, hate is just another way of keeping someone close, another chain you wear because it feels like armor." Ava's lips trembled. She looked down quickly, blinking hard, but the tears came anyway. "I wish I'd known her like you did," she whispered. "Not just the broken version." Eleanor reached across the table, resting her hand over Ava's. "You still can. She's in you. The laughter, the wildness, the way you ask questions nobody wants to answer." Ava let out a shaky breath that turned into a sob. "She was always so sad. I never understood why." "She was human," Eleanor said softly. "That's all sadness really is. Being human too long without forgiveness." The girl wept then, not just for her mother, but for all the years between them that could have been love instead of distance. Eleanor stayed still, her hand steady over hers, eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass. Outside, the lights flickered like memories, bright, brief, and beautiful in their fragility. And for the first time, Eleanor didn't see herself as the woman who was betrayed or the sister who was wronged. She saw herself, simply, as someone who had survived love's imperfections and turned them into grace. Ava's tears slowed. Her shoulders eased. When she looked up again, her reflection met Eleanor's in the glass. Two faces blurred into one quiet lineage of strength and sorrow, forgiveness and becoming. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. "You know," she said, her voice like the hush before dawn, "we're not here to carry what broke them. We're here to understand it, and then let it go." Outside, the snow began to fall again, small, soundless, forgiving. And in that reflection, between light and shadow, a family that had been torn apart began to heal. Not loudly, not suddenly, but completely. The house was unusually silent that morning. Not heavy, just hollow, like it was learning how to breathe again. Eleanor sat at her desk, her cup of tea gone cold beside her, a ray of sunlight stretching across scattered papers and the silver-framed photograph of 3 young girls once laughing in a field. A soft knock broke the stillness. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes red but steady. "She asked me to give you this," she whispered, holding out an envelope, its edges yellowed with time. The handwriting, delicate, slanted, was unmistakable. Lila. For a long moment, Eleanor couldn't move. The ink of that name seemed to reach out from the past, not to wound, but to touch gently, like an apology finally spoken aloud. She took the envelope, her fingers trembling just slightly. Ava stepped back, giving her space. Eleanor waited until the door closed, until the only sound was the ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of trees outside. Then, with a quiet breath, she broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet, cream-colored, folded once. The ink had faded at the edges, as if even words age when they've waited too long to be read. She unfolded it slowly. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means time has done what I could not. It has softened the edges between us. You were always the stronger one. Not because you didn't feel pain, but because you never let it turn you cruel. I told myself I was saving you from a loveless life, but maybe I was only saving myself from the shame of my own choices. Tell Ava how to become like you, not me. Tell her that love is not about taking what you want, but cherishing what you're given. I envied you your grace, your patience, your quiet kind of power. I mistook it for weakness once. I know better now. If forgiveness ever finds its way to me, let it come through your heart. If it cannot, let this letter be enough." Lila Eleanor's hands lingered on the paper long after she'd finished reading. The ink had smudged in places, maybe from tears, Lila's or her own. Sunlight fell across the letter, illuminating the faint shimmer of blue ink. Forgiveness written, not spoken. She folded it gently, pressing it to her chest. Not as a keepsake of what was lost, but as a final act of surrender, a sister's last offering. Her eyes glistened, but there was no ache in her expression now, only softness, the kind that comes when pain finally runs out of places to hide. Ava entered quietly, standing beside her. "Was it hard to read?" she asked. Eleanor shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It was necessary." They stood together by the window, the morning light washing over them. Outside, the trees swayed gently, their branches casting moving shadows that looked almost like handwriting. Lines of forgiveness written by the wind itself. Ava whispered, "What will you do with it?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Keep it," she said. "Not for the words, but for the ink. It reminds me that even the things we write in sorrow can still dry into peace." And as she placed the letter inside a drawer lined with old memories, childhood photographs, pressed flowers, forgotten dreams, she realized something quietly profound. Strength was never born from revenge. It came from surviving it, with dignity, with grace, and with the courage to still believe in light after betrayal. The city glowed beneath her, a living mosaic of light and motion. From this height, Manhattan looked eternal, windows flickering like stars, streets pulsing like veins of a giant heart. The world moved on, indifferent yet beautiful, exactly as it always had. Eleanor leaned against the glass railing, a cup of tea warming her palms. The air was cool, the kind of crispness that carried memory without weight. Inside, faint laughter echoed from the other room. Ava's voice. Young, sure, alive. 18 years ago, this same city had swallowed her whole. She came here to hide, to rebuild, to turn her grief into armor. Now that armor had softened into something finer. Grace. She turned slightly, glancing through the sliding doors. Ava sat at her desk, the same desk where Eleanor once signed contracts, built empires, and buried her pain under numbers. Now it held new energy, notebooks, sketches, laughter. The girl had inherited not her mother's mistakes, but Eleanor's quiet resilience. Eleanor smiled. "You'll stay late again, won't you?" Ava grinned. "Only until the skyline says it's time to stop." They shared a knowing look, the kind that didn't need translation. Between them, no apologies, no ghosts, just understanding. Eleanor stepped back out into the open air. The wind caught the edge of her shawl, carrying with it the faint scent of rain, a whisper of the past, gentle now, harmless. She looked out toward the horizon, where the orange of the setting sun faded into violet, where yesterday's ache dissolved into tomorrow's calm. Her voice was soft when she spoke, barely louder than the hum of the city below. "He left me for my sister." She paused, her eyes following the skyline. "But life brought me her best part." The words hung there, not bitter, not triumphant, just true. She smiled, not for victory, but for release. Behind her, Ava's phone buzzed with messages from new clients, women seeking guidance, trying to find their footing after loss. Ava had named her initiative the Phoenix Fund, inspired, she said, by a woman who rebuilt her life from ashes without ever raising her voice. Eleanor didn't correct her. She just listened, a soft pride threading through her calm. The wind shifted. The city lights began to shimmer, each window a fragment of her journey. Every choice, every silence, every forgiveness reflected back in gold. For a fleeting moment, she saw her reflection in the glass, and beside it, faintly, the ghost of her sister's smile. Not haunting her, just existing, peacefully. She whispered, "It's all right now." Ava stepped onto the balcony, wrapping a light cardigan around her shoulders. "It's beautiful tonight," she said. Eleanor nodded. "It always was. I just couldn't see it back then." They stood together as the last of the sun dipped below the skyline, the city breathing beneath them. The hum of life rose like applause, soft, endless, forgiving. Eleanor placed a hand over Ava's, feeling the warmth of a new beginning. The skyline shimmered, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what had quietly returned.